with the third in what will end up being a 4-part video on the point of appointments, a document in the Baltimore Washington Conference that Bishop Easterling has provided that guides our work in making appointments. The first 2 videos focused on the introductory sections, and this video and the next video are going to get into the nuts and bolts of how appointments work. And the thing I want to share with you is this is public. So this document actually, if you're in the Baltimore Washington Conference this week, came out in a link in our e-connection. It is a 4-page document titled Point of Appointments. And so I've been working, mine's a little highlighted as I've been doing these videos. I will drop the link into the description or comments where this videos will post. So after the video goes live, I'll post it to YouTube and Facebook, but you can find the Point of Appointments document. I encourage you to read it. So I'm trying to summarize it on video for you, but I encourage you to read it. The process for how appointments is done is not secret, at least in the Baltimore Washington Conference. The principles that underlie appointments are shared across our connection. The logistics that I'm going to get into in this video, again, looking at kind of what the experience is for clergy. And then the next video, looking at what the experience is for SPRCs, is outlined in the process with a couple caveats. And I'll offer these at the beginning of the next video. So caveats. So the default way that the process is outlined is most commonly true for full-time appointments. Some part-time appointments are sometimes some of the things, some of the logistics, I'll try to talk through that when I go through the videos, might be a little different for part-times. Also, there are always exceptions, okay? There are not like frequent exceptions, so that it's not that, that we have a common process. And sometimes there are needs for the process, the logistics of it to be a little bit different. I'm not going to be able to cover all of those. Some of those are common, like how an associate pastor position, there might be some things that are slightly different in terms of conversation about that. There might be unique situations where an appointment is done particularly off cycle, that some of the steps might be done a little bit differently, always with the idea of fulfilling the purpose. And so I want to encourage you to, if you're looking at the document, go back to the beginning to look at the principles of appointment and our United Methodist undergirding, our theological understanding that guides appointment work. Those are foundational. And when we do things a little bit differently, it might be because the situation requires us to do that, to live into our principles. As I shared in earlier videos, if you're watching and you're from another annual conference, understand that the process of appointment is going to be, the logistics of how it's done is going to be specific to an annual conference and really specific to a bishop at a given time. So with those caveats. So for clergy, here's how the process works. And again, if you're following the Point of Appointments document, this begins at the bottom of page 2. Generally, the cabinet is regularly discussing the missional needs across the annual conference, as well as clergy gifts and skills, right? That kind of happens incidentally throughout our work. One of the principles that I shared and that the document talks about that's important, and I would think in all annual conferences, is consultation. And consultation is both ongoing and it's focused at the time when a new appointment is requested or needed. Consultation is all of the ways that the bishop and cabinet come to know about clergy and about congregations. Again, today we're going to focus on clergy. So if you're a pastor, all of the one-on-ones you have with your district superintendent and the interactions you have, the forms you fill out, whether it's your self-evaluation, your pastor's report for church conference, all of the interactions, all of these things help your district superintendent get to know you. All of the interactions that you have on a regular basis with those who are sitting at the cabinet table. And at the cabinet table, our district superintendents, our assistant to the bishop, our chief administrative officer, and of course, Bishop Easterling. In any annual conference, it is the bishop that makes appointments. And the process and the people and the way in which, honestly, the bishop takes the guidance and wisdom of the group is up to the bishop. Bishops make appointments. And so the Point of Appointments document really is Bishop Easterling kind of laying out here's how we generally do things. So in this point of appointments document, a reminder that, always we are talking about the missional needs and the gifts and skills of pastors. A change of appointment, so a pastor going to a new church or going to do something else, can be initiated by the pastor. So an example of that might be the pastor would like to move to retirement. It could be the pastor wants to go into extension ministry. They want to serve in a position outside of the local church for a nonprofit. And there's a whole process that for an elder where that would have to be approved and people that would be involved in that, but that would be initiated by the pastor. Also, every year, as part of the evaluation process, both clergy and SPRCs have the opportunity, it's at the end of the evaluation form in the Baltimore Washington Conference, the portion called the advisory form. And that's where you basically say whether as a pastor you'd like to stay, as an SPRC, if you'd like for your pastor to stay. And that form is available. You can see that some of the questions that clergy are asked include, would you be interested in a new appointment? Would you be willing to stay? Sometimes a pastor might say yes to both of those. Yes, I think this would be a good season for an appointment move, a change, but I'd be willing to stay. If a pastor were to say, I'd like a new appointment, and no, I don't want to stay. So all of those pieces, right, help guide our work. None of those answers from a pastor or from an SPRC are determinative of whether a new appointment will happen, right? So we take very seriously what is shared in those forms, but there's a lot of moving pieces. And there's conversation that your district superintendent is having with you as a pastor to better understand how you've filled out that form. Sometimes as a district superintendent, often I've had conversation with clergy before they filled out the form. And sometimes our conversation kind of guides how they might fill that out. It's up to the clergy person how to fill that, they will fill that form out as part of their self-evaluation and advisory. But there's also other questions. If you were to receive a new appointment, what are things that need to be taken into consideration? It's really important. So again, this video focused on clergy. It's really important for clergy that you take very seriously the information that you're sharing and share vital information. For elders, you have committed to itinerate. And so certainly the default expectation that I certainly, have been in ministry with, and I think that we share, is that if then given an appointment, that you would be able to accept the appointment. Understanding that there might be conditions that would make that more challenging, and even in extreme cases where a pastor might request limited itinerancy. And I touched a little bit on the last video on that, so I won't spend a lot of time in this video. But on that advisory form is the place where a pastor might indicate, my kid's going into their senior year in high school. It'd be hard for us to move. What type of ministry do you feel most called to? Urban or rural or suburban ministry? What would you be, if you were to receive an appointment, what would you be interested in? You need to fill that section out in your advisory form fully and accurately, even if you've said, I don't want a new appointment. Because as much as a change of appointment can be initiated by the pastor, part of the, can be requested by the SPRC. Every year there are pastors who have asked to stay, whose SPRCs have asked to stay, and they receive a new appointment. That's just how the process works. It's not just people who've asked for a move that get new appointments. And probably every pastor who's been in the process for a few years has had an appointment change where they've not requested it, because that's how it works. So it's important that you fill out that information. And if there are reasons why this would be a difficult year for you to move, to also, again, fill out the advisory form as thoroughly as possible and make sure that you're communicating clearly with your district superintendent, because they are going to be the ones at the table to share that information. But it is important that you don't just talk to your district superintendent, but you also put as much of that information in writing, because the ways that you fill out that advisory form are also other members of the cabinet, the bishop and cabinet have access. Those forms go into Arena so that we can see how a person has filled it out. So make sure that you are filling that out. All of that is part of the consultation process. So again, sometimes we think People might talk about the consultation process in appointment making with SPRCs, but it really is also clergy who have that consultation. Again, there's some specific opportunities for that, like on the advisory form and in one-on-ones that you have with your district superintendent. But all of the interactions, same with the SPRC, we'll talk about in the next video, all of the interactions that you're having with the district superintendent help shape their understanding of your needs, your gifts, your skills, and what God might be calling you to in the next season of ministry, and when God might be calling you to a new season of ministry. And again, the way that those forms are filled out inform the process, but they're not necessarily determinative, because there are lots of factors that play into when a pastor might make a move. The additional piece that I think part of is part of that whole discernment and that work of when a pastor requests new appointment is also through the Clear Open process that we started in Baltimore Washington Conference in Peninsula Delaware last appointment season. So end of 23 into 2024, is that clergy have the opportunity to apply for those positions that are listed on the website. And there's FAQs and more information on the conference website about how that process works. But a pastor might look at those open opportunities that are posted, and even if on their form they didn't request a move, they might say, oh, this is an opportunity I feel really called to. So all of those might be part of that discernment. So when a new appointment is being considered, so a congregation has an open pulpit, either because their pastor is retiring, or their pastor's been appointed to another church, or their pastor's going on leave, or for some reason the pastor's leaving. The district superintendent at this point will work with the SPRC, have consultation, again, I'll talk about in the next video, prepares a detailed profile on the church and on the congregation. And we have a lot of data that we work with. It's not just the church data, it's also data from clergy. So it's advisory form information. It's if we know that a pastor is going to need a move, we prepare some more information on the pastor. That it might be because the pastor's newly coming into ministry. Maybe they're a provisional elder. Maybe they're at a position where they're part-time and they're going to need a full-time. So when we know that pastors are going to need new appointments, we certainly make sure that we're prepared for that. But really, all of the time, we have information on clergy's gifts, skills. We have access to their advisory form, and we'll have conversation generally about what the needs are and who's available. But when a new appointment comes up, and again, as the process lays out, cloaked in prayer, the district superintendent of the church will share about the congregation. And in that process, again, moving through with prayer, we'll also lift names and discuss those persons who are identified as possible people to serve as the pastor in that setting in the next season. Discernment, discussion, and it's important at that point that we have as much information as possible. So again, I'll say it with SPRCs, but clergy, make sure that you're sharing information, again, on your advisory form, on those official documents that you have opportunity to share, but also that you are having conversation with your district superintendent. It is better to do this ahead of time, right? It's better to make sure that that you're sharing what you need, what you're going to be best at, what you feel God's calling you to. So after prayer, names are offered and listed, and then there's discussion of gifts and ministry skills, ministry experience, logistics. Has the pastor, maybe they haven't requested limited itineracy, but there's a reason why it might be better for them to be one area or another. Where have they served? There's, often thought is given to, it might not be the best thing to appoint a pastor to a church the next town over. And again, sometimes there are reasons why there might be exceptions to these, but all of the logistical pieces, what's compensation, what's housing, has the pastor requested a parsonage or a housing allowance, what's available, all of these things, right? So in a given season, when there's an open church, as I shared recently with an SPRC, it is not as though all of the clergy in the conference are generally available for every appointment. There might be reasons why certain clergy, it's generally not a good time to move. They just went to a new appointment, or there's certain gifts and skills that a church needs. And so really we're going to focus then on who those folks are. So if you think of the group of all of the clergy available for appointment, and that group kind of quite quickly gets a little bit smaller because of the ministry needs and because of the practical considerations. And so the point of appointment document shares that after discussion with the district superintendents and a desire for consensus, ultimately it is up to Bishop Easterling to make the appointments. That's one of the things I hope every video I've touched on. It is the bishop that makes the appointments. And our bishop does so with great and deep discernment. And one of the things that I appreciate is that is Bishop Easterling's discernment to not rush to make appointments just to be done, but really to feel that the Spirit is moving in the process of making appointments. So once an appointment has been made, all of that discussion has happened at that cabinet table. The first call that the district superintendent will make will be to the pastor. And the way that our process works now, the district superintendent will have conversation with the pastor, share about the church, share why, some of the reasons why the bishop is offering them this appointment. And they'll be invited to 24 to 48 hours for prayer and discernment. Again, the default expectation is that a pastor will accept the appointment that they're offered, but there might be some extreme situations in which a pastor might need to request reconsideration for significant missional reasons or for personal reasons, especially those that they don't already have opportunity to share. If there's a reason why, as a pastor, you could imagine needing to request reconsideration, like if you can imagine that ahead of time, that should be in the information that you've provided on your advisory, in some cases, and on the itinerary, the limited itinerary form, and certainly with your district superintendent. But there might be things that might come up. There might be a mismatch in terms of ministry, maybe where we've identified and seen from the pastor's ministry experience them to be gifted. Maybe that doesn't really line up with what the church is asking for. If good conversation has happened ahead of time and this information has been shared, we won't come to that. We wouldn't come to that point. But sometimes that happens. And then a pastor would have the opportunity to request reconsideration. And again, at this point in the process and really throughout, this is confidential. The pastor should not be sharing with people that they have been offered a new appointment. Sometimes, as clergy in the time of discernment, sometimes after discernment, we've accepted the appointment. You might drive by the church, but you have to do this in a way that nobody knows you're there, right? Nobody should know that you're discerning an appointment, that you are that you've accepted an appointment if it hasn't been announced yet. It's very confidential and needs to be held confidential. Should not be shared with friends. There might be a spouse, really close key folks who also have to keep it confidential, that persons who need to be part of the discernment process, but it should not be shared, right? So this needs to be kept confidential. So again, the vast majority of the time, the pastor accepts the appointment, and then they get back to the district superintendent and say, yes, I'm excited about the appointment. I'm willing to move forward. And then the district superintendent would reach out to the SPRC of the church to which they've been appointed to schedule what we call a take-in meeting. That becomes the opportunity for the pastor to get to know the SPRC and for the SPRC to get to know the pastor. I'll talk more in the next video about that meeting, because that becomes part of the SPRC's opportunity to be part of that discernment. And again, in extraordinarily rare circumstances, to request reconsideration if they need to. It's very, very rare. But I'll talk about that more in the next video. For a pastor, once you have accepted the appointment, met with the SPRC, had an opportunity for them to get to know you, to have general get to know you questions. Once the SPRC has also affirmed the appointment, then if you are a pastor who is leaving an appointment, the district superintendent of your current church would also need to do a take-out meeting. So the meeting that you're meeting the SPRC we call that generally a take-in meeting. A take-out meeting is when you, as a pastor, this is usually a brief meeting, that you as a pastor at your current church would share with your SPRC that you've accepted a new appointment. The SPRCs need to be holding confidentiality at this juncture, certainly as well. It's always part of the SPRC's work to hold confidentiality. In an ideal world, the take-in meeting and the take-out meeting would happen within 1 week, and then the announcement of the new appointment would be made at both churches, or all involved churches, on the same Sunday, on that next Sunday. Sometimes that timeline has to be changed a little bit because of logistics. Those meetings, something happens. This time of year, maybe snow affects some of those meetings, but that's really the ideal then. But certainly, it has to be kept confidential till it's announced in both churches. Then, as a pastor receiving a new appointment, we provide a lot of, we hope, really great transition training material. Some of that is online. Our Center for Clergy Excellence provides online components that you can access right away as a pastor beginning a new appointment. And then we generally do an in-person training much closer to the start date of the new appointment, July 1. Where the SPRC and the pastor can work together on setting expectations. And again, we have another great document that Bishop Easterling has prepared, a Beginning Well document that lays out some of those areas where we expect pastors and new SPRCs are going to be working together to set expectations. So that's what that process is like for clergy going into appointments. And the next video, I'll talk about what that process is like. The process is the same, but the particular view of an SPRC and how the SPRC is going to be having conversation with the district superintendent along that process as well. So have a great day. And again, I'll post that next video, hopefully in the